Director Evans's visits to the office had become a familiar, unwelcome interruption. The door swung open with a familiar groan. "Dr." Julian Thorne didn't look up, the nib of his pen scratching methodically across the surface of the grant proposal. He had already stated his refusal to pivot his research. The director's voice was a practiced, soothing balm as he explained, yet again, the lack of suitable candidates for the project. Julian finally lifted his head. He reminded the director that his own specialty was pharmacological development, a field far removed from the case in question. He was aware of the alpha known as Caden Vance, of course. The file detailed a catastrophic incident rooted in pheromonal dissonance. To Julian, it seemed less a subject for serious research and more a case for simple containment. He thought wryly that if every anomaly was a research project, the world's deviants could solve unemployment, each one a specimen for study. The director sighed, a sound heavy with manufactured defeat. He spoke of the subject's pheromones, describing them as so potent they had already caused injuries among the staff. Julian's pen slowed, a dark pool of ink bleeding into the paper. Evans pressed his advantage, insisting he wouldn't have troubled Julian if there were any other choice. Julian understood the unspoken logic. He was one of the few betas in the institute functionally immune to the pheromonal tides that governed alphas and omegas. He gave a clipped nod and corrected his posture, assuring the director he would give it consideration. After Evans left, Julian stared at his own project files for a long time. With a sigh layered with complexity, he tossed the pen aside and massaged the bridge of his nose. He navigated the sterile corridors from memory, arriving at a laboratory tucked away in a high-security wing of the facility. The level of clearance required was a testament to the administration's investment in this case. After a retinal scan and palm print verification, the heavy door slid open. The interior was not the scene of bloody chaos he had half expected. It was unnervingly quiet. Through a thick panel of observational glass, Caden Vance stood watching him. A low whistle cut through the silence as Caden assessed him with an amused glint in his eye, asking why they'd sent someone new. Julian's expression remained impassive. He stated coldly that the reason was irrelevant. Caden's eyebrow arched in a gesture of careless amusement. Julian, in turn, cataloged the man before him. High-risk individuals like this were best kept at a significant distance. Caden's voice was a low purr. He wondered aloud if the dear doctor needed instructions on what to do next, his fingers tapping a light rhythm against the glass. Julian forced himself to ignore the man's gaze, which felt like a physical weight, intensely unsettling. He told Caden to simply manage himself. Picking up a nearby report, he scanned the data, his focus a shield. Caden feigned disappointment at his coldness, then leaned his chin on his hand, a wide, unrestrained smile spreading across his face. He liked it. The man's chatter was a constant, irritating buzz in the background. Julian paused, his eyes lifting to meet Caden's. The man leaned closer, pressing his palm flat against the glass, a playful challenge in his smile. He asked if Julian had fallen for him already. In response, Julian's gaze turned to ice. He picked up a fresh pen and snapped it cleanly in two. Caden's eyes flickered from Julian's hands to his face, his stare holding a deep, unreadable meaning. Julian dropped the broken pieces onto the desk and turned to leave. His application to take over the project was approved with startling speed. Director Evans beamed with relief, waving him off to his new assignment. Julian nodded, a seed of doubt planted in his mind. Approvals of this magnitude usually took days, not hours. The higher-ups were clearly anxious. He announced his new role to Caden, his voice level and firm, each word spaced for emphasis. He would be in full charge of the experiment, and he expected full cooperation. Caden stood with his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed, and assured Julian that he would cooperate completely. He then winked, his voice dropping into a suggestive tone, asking Julian to be gentle. Julian ignored him, turning his attention to the previous researcher's files. The data was a chaotic mess, a patchwork of incomplete procedures and shoddy notes. He found himself questioning if actual scientists had been involved. Shaking his head, he dismissed the thought as paranoia. The existing material was useless. He would have to start from scratch. Without looking up from his datapad, he asked about Caden's pheromones. After a few seconds of silence, Caden's slow, deliberate voice replied that he didn't know. Julian's brow furrowed. It was impossible not to know. The man was lounging against the far wall, long legs crossed, the picture of lazy indifference. It was clear he was being difficult. Julian set down his stylus. Caden looked back at him with an expression of pure innocence, insisting that he truly didn't know because they were unstable. He then asked, with a hint of mockery, if Julian was unaware that he possessed two distinct pheromonal signatures. Julian froze. Now he understood the research imperative. He demanded to know what they were. Caden smiled a roguish smile and beckoned with a finger, suggesting Julian come in and smell for himself. Julian's stare remained flat and unmoved. Caden shrugged with theatrical regret. "Fine," he said. "Red wine and rust." Rust, Julian thought, was a bizarre descriptor. Caden closed his eyes as if contemplating it. He clarified that it was something like the scent of blood. After a moment's hesitation, Julian chose his words carefully, instructing him to release a small amount for component analysis. Caden's voice was laced with amusement as he agreed. The test results were profoundly abnormal. The primary pheromone was, indeed, red wine. The rust component was highly unstable, incompatible with the primary signature. The concentration levels were astonishingly high. Even as a beta, Julian felt a wave of discomfort. His breathing grew shallow, and he fought to suppress the physical reaction. Caden's smirk deepened. He asked if Julian was feeling anything, then added lazily that he himself felt a faint stinging sensation. Days of research yielded no progress. Julian licked his dry lips, recording another set of inconclusive data. Caden, ever restless, tilted his head and smiled through the glass. He commented on how serious Dr. Thorne was, asking if he ever took a break. Julian adjusted his glasses, stating flatly that the integrity of the data required rigor. Caden's smile widened. He moved closer to the barrier, his voice a low murmur, calling Julian adorable. Julian ignored him. One could never win an argument with someone so shameless. Watching the values spike on the monitor, he pressed a button on the console. He advised Caden to conserve his pheromones, as his charms had no effect on him. He changed tactics, asking if Caden had any particularly noteworthy life experiences. Caden raised an eyebrow, wanting to know what kind he meant. He then volunteered, with a suggestive wink, that he had never marked anyone. He belonged to Julian, he purred. The gap between them felt vast. Julian looked at the man's infuriating face and, for the first time, felt a genuine desire to punch someone. No wonder the project had stalled. The lab door opened. Director Evans was a frequent visitor, his concern for the project bordering on obsessive. He offered Julian a brief, encouraging smile, but his eyes kept drifting toward Caden, who was now feigning sleep on a small sofa in his enclosure. A certainty settled in Julian's gut. They knew each other. After the director left, Julian casually asked Caden if he knew the man. Caden opened his eyes, blinking with a convincing sleepiness, and denied it, asking if Evans wasn't just their boss. His expression was sincere, showing no hint of deception. Julian pressed further, stating that Caden seemed hostile toward him. Caden stared at him for a long moment before a low, hoarse laugh escaped him. He asked if Julian was always so attentive. He explained that his feelings were purely instinctual. The director simply rubbed him the wrong way. But Julian, he added, his dark eyes fixed on him, was different. The more he looked, the more he liked. Julian began to question his own intuition. Perhaps he was overthinking things. Caden's sudden rut caught him completely off guard. Red lights strobed across the lab, and a high-pitched alarm shrieked through the facility. Julian hadn't imagined his pheromone levels could be high enough to trigger the hazard system. The sound was piercing. Caden stood perfectly still, his eyes dark pools of unreadable emotion. For no reason he could name, a profound sadness washed over Julian. A sharp, acidic pang struck his heart, making it hard to breathe. He was shocked. His pheromones shouldn't have this effect. It was impossible. He was a beta. A low chuckle came from the enclosure. The emotion swirling in Caden's dark eyes intensified, his body tensing as if under immense strain. A sense of deep unease settled over Julian. He called out Caden's name, asking if he was still conscious. There was no reply. All personnel were being forcibly evacuated. Director Evans yelled for Julian to get out immediately. The rut of a top-tier alpha was terrifying, capable of overwhelming even a beta. But Julian had never witnessed such an event and was frozen by indecision. He told the director to go ahead, that he would follow after activating the air purification system. He stabbed at the button, intending to retreat. A glance back toward the enclosure stopped him. His eyes met Caden's, and his heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. Ignoring the feeling, he turned to leave, but a tremendous crash echoed behind him. The sound of shattering glass. In an instant, a crushing wave of pheromonal pressure slammed into him. Even he felt a suffocating force. Cold sweat slicked his back, and a sharp pain flared in his neck. He spun around. Caden stood with his head bowed, his right hand still raised. The sheer, terrifying force required to break tempered, bulletproof glass was unimaginable. He advanced on Julian, his presence in the confined space overwhelmingly dangerous. Before his brain could process the threat, Julian slammed the lockdown control for the main laboratory door. Under no circumstances could he be allowed to escape. Caden closed the distance between them. Julian instinctively backed away, his right hand fumbling for the uncapped steel pen on a nearby counter. Caden's voice was a hoarse whisper. Julian Thorne. Julian froze. He was still conscious. In that moment of hesitation, Caden's fingers brushed against his cheek. Then he was pulled into a hard embrace. A desperate, hungry mouth found his neck. Reality crashed back in. Julian realized what was happening and shoved him away with all his might. The man was clearly not in his right mind, or he would have realized Julian was a beta, that there was no gland to bite. An alpha in a rut craved an omega's pheromones, something Julian could never provide. Pushed away, Caden stared at the back of Julian's neck, a look of profound confusion on his face. He mumbled something too low for Julian to hear, about the gland being gone. Of course, there was no gland. Caden's face contorted in agony. He collapsed to his knees, his hands slamming against his own head in a desperate, violent rhythm. This had to be a side effect of the pheromonal overload. Before Julian could formulate a plan, Caden passed out. At one point, his life signs flatlined. Julian was about to hit the medical emergency alert when he caught a glimpse of the monitor. Caden had angled it toward the wall. The man himself was sitting up on the sofa, casually greeting him. He rattled the medical restraints still on his wrists. He hadn't expected Dr. Thorne to have such peculiar tastes. An alpha's rut typically lasted a week. Yet now Caden appeared perfectly normal, a stark contrast to his earlier state. He was conscious and lucid. Caden held up his cuffed hands. He asked if Julian was going to unlock them. Julian stared at him for a long moment before retrieving the key. As the lock clicked open, Caden spoke quietly. "Julian Thorne, you've been marked before." The statement was absurd. Caden in his rut was either an idiot or blind. Now it seemed his sense of smell was failing him too. Julian raised an eyelid, his response slow and dismissive. He was a beta. Caden cut him off, insisting it was impossible. His confidence was absolute. Julian couldn't be bothered to argue, telling him to believe what he wanted. Caden scoffed and turned away. A knock came at the door. Julian turned to see Leo, one of his junior researchers, offering a mild smile and holding a folder. He asked politely if he could ask his mentor a question. Leo had taken over Julian's old project. Julian agreed and stepped out into the hallway, away from Caden's knowing, amused smirk. Leo pointed out an anomaly in the data, a computational error. Julian corrected him, advising him to be more careful next time. A faint blush crept up Leo's ears. He then asked if Julian was free for lunch. He wanted to treat him. Julian handed the folder back, his voice even. "That was fine," he said, "but it would be his treat." After Leo left, Julian returned to the lab. The previous day's reports contained several values that made no sense. They might be the key. He looked at Caden, who was slouched on the sofa. A thought occurred to him, and he asked if it was true that Caden had injured the previous researchers. Caden nodded. "Yes," he said, "and he'd also robbed a bank and killed a man." Julian's face remained blank. He was being serious. Caden replied just as smoothly that he was too. The atmosphere turned tense. Julian was the first to look away, apologizing for having misheard. He was lost in thought when the door was kicked open. A disheveled man stumbled in, muttering incoherently. The air filled with a stale, sour odor. Before Julian could react, Director Evans rushed in with a team of security personnel. He asked anxiously if Julian was all right as his men pinned the intruder to the floor. The director's face was a mask of disgust. He apologized, explaining that a patient had wandered into the restricted area and that he would have him removed immediately. He promised it wouldn't happen again. Julian shook his head, his eyes fixed on the man being dragged away. The man's face was a canvas of terror and desperation. His eyes kept finding Julian's. It was a silent, frantic plea for help. "Wait," Julian said suddenly. He suggested they ask him how he got in. But the group continued down the hall without pause, disappearing around the corner. Evans assured Julian he would handle the inquiry later and urged him to focus on his work. After a few more questions, the director also left. The man's terrified gaze lingered in Julian's mind. He knew with sudden, chilling certainty that the director was lying. He sent a quick message to Leo, canceling their lunch. The reply came almost instantly. It was fine, they could reschedule. He put his phone down. Caden was watching him, his expression cool and analytical. He let out a short, sharp laugh. This place, he remarked, was certainly interesting. Julian left the lab. The corridor was empty and silent. It was the perfect time to visit the security office. The door was unlocked, a thin sliver of light spilling from the crack. He pushed it open. Monitors flickered with live feeds from around the facility. As he tried to rewind the footage, the screens went black. He heard the faint sound of breathing just behind him and drove his elbow back hard. "Brother." The voice was a pained yelp. "He's on our side." Julian spun around, startled, to see a strange face. The man's eyes welled with tears. He choked out that his name was Miles. His tears started to flow freely. Julian cut him off with a cold stare, stating that he didn't know him. Miles struggled to compose himself. He begged Julian to listen, insisting that the director was not a good man, that he was trying to use Julian to help him. Julian kicked him hard, sending Miles stumbling back in shocked pain. Director Evans stood in the doorway, a tranquilizer gun in his hand, his expression venomous. He said there was a rat in the laboratory that needed to be exterminated. Miles, realizing the danger, yelled for Julian to run. "You're not getting away," Evans snarled, squeezing the trigger. A dart shot from the barrel. A dull thud of a body hitting the floor echoed in the small room. Caden stood over the director, tossing a heavy metal rod aside with a look of distaste. He asked Julian how he had managed to get on the director's bad side. Miles stared at Caden, his eyes wide and red-rimmed. "Brother." Caden flinched and took a step back, telling him not to claim relatives he didn't have. Miles ignored him, asking how he got out. Caden, seeming to enjoy the situation, explained that his brother here had trusted him enough to let him out. Miles looked at Julian with disbelief and awe. He said Julian must be psychic. The truth was Julian had acted on a gut feeling, a sudden, inexplicable impulse. Caden had simply refused to be locked up again. But his presence here was still a shock. Miles grew tense, urging them to leave immediately. But Julian found him suspicious as well, this sudden appearance and forced familiarity. Seeing the doubt in Julian's eyes, Miles grew desperate, swearing on his life that he wasn't tricking him. Julian asked what the director wanted to use him for. Miles explained that Evans wanted to use Julian's expertise to perform experimental alpha gland modifications. It matched what Julian had already surmised. He then asked about the disheveled man from earlier. Caden answered flatly, "He's dead." A new voice cut in from the doorway. "It's a shame," it said, "because all of you are about to die." Leo pushed the door open, his hands spread in a gesture of mock apology. He said he'd been waiting for them. He looked at Julian, his head tilted. "Is this why you canceled our lunch, Mentor? I'm very disappointed." His tone was casual, but his hand gestured upward. "Mentor, come here." Caden moved to stand in front of Julian. "Then you can stay disappointed," he said. Leo's face hardened, but his voice turned soft again when he addressed Julian. "Be good, Mentor." "Impossible," Julian said coldly. The words seemed to shatter Leo's composure. He shrieked, "Why do you always choose him? What about me? Why don't you ever see me?" Julian took a step back. "Leo, calm down." Caden raised an eyebrow. The word "always" is an interesting choice. Leo stood there, lost, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't blame me for this, Mentor." He snapped his fingers. Men in white coats, armed with tranquilizer guns, flooded the hallway. They were not researchers. "Begin," Leo commanded. "Don't touch the one in the middle." Miles took one step and collapsed. The men converged on Caden. Julian threw himself in front of him. "What you're doing is illegal," he said, his voice shaking with cold fury. Leo's eyes were red. He snatched a gun from one of his men and fired it at Julian. In a split second, Caden shoved him out of the way and collapsed. A sharp, piercing pain shot through Julian's head. Another shot rang out and the world went black. He forced his eyes open to darkness. His body was numb, the paralytic still in effect. His head throbbed, and voices swam in and out of focus around him. I told you not to touch him. He knows now you'll get us all killed. Then we'll just wipe him again. Wipe what? He fought to stay conscious, but his eyelids were leaden weights. The arguing voices faded. In the haze, he saw an image of Caden, and standing next to him was himself. But this was impossible. He had never met Caden outside the lab. The vision was of Caden kissing him, of his own hand on Caden's gland, responding. The images flashed faster. Caden pinning him to a wall, his lips tracing a line down his neck, his canines resting against his nape, teasing the gland there. Brother, let me mark you. I want them to know you're mine. The hot breath on his skin, the flush on his own face. If you say another word, get out, he heard himself growl. Then the sharp bite, the flood of pheromones, his body going limp in Caden's arms. Caden's soft chuckle. Brother, just bear with it. The tingling sensation spreading through him, the way he tried to pull away, but Caden held him fast, pressing him closer. Enough, his own voice trembling. You've had enough, he snarled, finally kicking Caden away. Caden's pained grunt, the flash of a smile in his eyes. So you still have some fight left in you, baby. The memories pieced themselves together. He and Caden undercover, their mission to expose the institute compromised. The man they were trying to save, Miles, now looking at him with manic glee. The others jeering. He was so stupid, falling for a simple act. They were all volunteers, the director explained from his chair, legs crossed. He asked why. Evans laughed. Why else? For power. For a taste of what others take for granted. He spoke of his own mother trying to strangle him, of how he had chopped her to pieces. That was how he justified transplanting alpha glands into others, dismissing the lethal rejection rates as survival of the fittest. He was strapped to a surgical table, helpless, watching them drag Caden away while Leo looked on. Where are they taking him? He was powerless, his muscles unresponsive. Leo leaned in close, his fingers touching Julian's cheek. My dear mentor, I don't like it when other people touch my things. So you'll have to be punished. Julian turned his head away. It was you, he rasped, knowing Leo would understand. Leo feigned innocence. Don't worry, I'll be gentle. He placed a finger on Julian's lips, his eyes full of sick adoration. A wave of nausea rolled over him. He asked what Leo was doing, that this was illegal. Leo just laughed. And? He asked. Julian's look of disgust seemed to wound him. He grabbed Julian's throat. Who gave you permission to look at me like that? Where is Caden? Julian forced the words out. Leo's smile was cruel. Don't worry. He'll be dead soon. Or worse. But it's okay. You'll forget all about him. As consciousness faded, one thought consumed him. Caden, you have to be okay. He exhaled slowly, the phantom despair of the memories clinging to him. Leo had removed his gland and wiped his mind, turning him into a tool for their twisted experiments. He let out a soft, bitter laugh. What had they done to Caden? His hood was ripped off. Blinding light seared his eyes, forcing tears to stream down his face. When he could finally see, Leo was smiling at him. Are you okay, mentor? Julian lowered his gaze, hiding the hatred that burned there. What is this? He asked. Leo's smile widened. I have something fun to show you. I know you'll want to see it. His body was slowly regaining feeling as the drugs wore off. Leo leaned closer, his eyes searching Julian's. Do you know why I like you, mentor? Julian recoiled. Like, you're not worthy of that word. Leo ignored him, lost in his own world. You are brilliant. I liked you from the first moment I saw you on that stage. Everyone was looking at you, but only I deserved you." His expression twisted. "But he got to you first. How dare he? He threw away all the gifts I sent you." "Why?" "The gifts," Leo explained, "were the dissected bodies of rats. He knew Julian would appreciate them. He was completely disconnected from reality. They were alone." Julian looked at the cold steel of the handcuff on his wrist. He made a decision. Grasping his left thumb with his right hand, he bent it back with brutal force. He bit down on a scream as the bone dislocated, the searing pain making him see stars. He wrenched his hand free of the cuff. Cold sweat poured down his forehead as he grabbed a glass beaker and smashed it on the corner of the stool. Shards flew, cutting his hand and Leo's face. Leo snapped back to reality, confused. Julian grabbed a large piece of glass. "Leo," he called out. As Leo looked at him, Julian lunged, dragging the jagged edge across his throat. Leo's eyes went wide with shock and fear. A bright red line appeared on his neck. Julian dropped the glass. His bloody hand clenched into a fist and ran. He had to find Caden and Miles. His body shook uncontrollably, his heart a block of ice. Where were they? He threw open door after door, finding them all empty. Then he heard a low groan from up ahead. He pushed open the door. The room was filled with men, lying on the floor, their faces contorted in agony. One reached for him. "Help me," he begged. Others joined in, a chorus of desperate pleas. "I don't want to die. I'll give you money. Save me." Julian grabbed the nearest man by his collar. "Where is the alpha?" he snarled. The man trembled. "You save me and I'll tell you." Julian's fingers tightened around his throat. "Then I'll send you to hell right now." The man choked, clawing at his hands. "I'll tell you. Straight ahead. The last room." Julian released him and started for the door, then paused and turned back, a cold smile on his face. "I won't fall for the same trick twice." He threw open the final door. Caden was on a surgical table, covered in blood. His body curled in on itself. Julian ran to him, falling to his knees. Caden's lips moved, but no sound came out. His face was a deathly white, his body racked with tremors. A raw, gaping wound was where his gland should have been. It had been carved out of him without anesthetic. Julian's vision blurred. A soundless scream tore through him. He lifted Caden's head, cradling it in his lap. The man's skin was cold as ice. Veins stood out on his forehead, and his eyes were unfocused. Seeing him like this was like a physical blow to Julian's own heart. He looked at the mangled flesh of Caden's neck, the vibrant red searing his vision. Hot tears fell from his own eyes. "Caden, look at me. Why won't you look at me?" A tear landed on Caden's face, and he stirred, his expression hazy. His breath was a faint wisp. "Go," he mouthed. A sharp, unbearable pain lanced through Julian's chest. He could barely speak, his voice a choked sob. "To the hospital." Caden couldn't speak, but his finger traced a single word in Julian's palm, over and over. "Go." "Together?" Caden nodded, a silent plea for Julian to let him go. "Hand," he managed to whisper, his gaze falling on Julian's dislocated hand. His own eyes reddened. Julian slipped an arm under Caden, half lifting, half dragging him out of the room. Sweat poured down Caden's face, but he clenched his jaw and didn't make a sound. His blood soaked through Julian's coat. Up ahead, he could see an exit. Hope surged through him. "Don't sleep, Caden. We're almost out." A heavy security door began to descend. A voice echoed from behind them. "'S a pity. Neither of you is getting out. It was Director Evans. I have to thank you for your gland. It's a remarkable thing. Julian froze. In that instant, Caden threw his entire body into him. A gunshot rang out, the bullet meant for Julian tearing into Caden's flesh instead. With his last ounce of strength, Caden shoved him forward. Julian flew through the air as the security door slammed shut behind him. He tumbled down a steep ramp, his body battered and bruised. He scrambled to his feet, screaming Caden's name. As he rushed back toward the door, a massive explosion ripped through the facility. A blast wave threw him backward, a wall of heat searing his skin. The building collapsed in on itself, a storm of dust and debris. He lay in a spreading pool of his own blood, the distant wail of sirens growing louder. His vision swam. Why couldn't they have been just a little sooner? He awoke to a white ceiling and the smell of disinfectant. Miles was beside the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Brother, you were in a coma for 7 days. Caden, I'm so sorry. He did it to give me time to signal for backup. Julian's mind was a fog, the words not quite connecting. A loud ringing filled his ears. His head felt like it was full of shattered glass. He stared at the ceiling. His right ear was deaf. The hearing in his left was severely damaged. He watched Miles's lips move. The doctors say your hand can recover. He tried to focus, to understand. He looked down at his mangled left hand. It was ugly. He was so tired. He remembered the moment Caden pushed him away. He had seen the tears on Caden's face, had seen his lips form 2 silent words. I'm sorry. Julian blinked, his eyes burning. Caden Vance, did you come here just to punish me? I hate you. I hate you so much. The cold ocean water swirled around his legs. He walked deeper, the waves crashing against his body. A hand grabbed him, pulling him back. Miles was shouting, his face a mess of tears and anger. Brother, what are you doing? Caden wanted me to take care of you. Julian's voice was hoarse. It wasn't his, was it? The microbomb. It was meant for me. The words were jumbled, but he knew Miles would understand. As the lead agent, a childless orphan with no ties, he was the logical choice for the failsafe. Caden had taken his place without a word. He looked at Miles, his gaze pleading. Take care of his parents for me. Miles was crying. They agreed, he said. They gave their blessing. Julian watched his lips form the words and let out a soft, broken laugh. Please, he whispered. He pulled his arm free and walked back into the sea. He gave a small wave over his shoulder, a final goodbye. Miles watched until the waves consumed him, then collapsed on the sand, his body shaking with sobs. Salt water filled his nose and lungs, the pressure building. A memory surfaced, a question he had asked Caden long ago. Why do you like me? Caden had laughed, the overhead light catching in his eyes. He had touched Julian's earlobe. I just do. Julian hadn't been satisfied with the answer, so Caden had asked him the same question back. He couldn't remember his own reply now. He only remembered the feeling of Caden's teeth on his gland, the warmth of the pheromones, and a whisper he had barely registered at the time. Julian, I love you. He hadn't paid it any mind. But now the weight of it was crushing. It was a love too fierce, too bitter, hot enough to scald the heart, to melt a man completely. Caden never knew that in Julian's heart, he had already surpassed everyone else. I love you too, Caden.